we shall delve into the world of Chief Information Security Officers, or CISOs, for our next presentation by Mr. Tom Brett, all the way from Ireland. The Chief Information Security Officer, or CISO, has become a key player within the most executive teams. CISOs are now closely involved in strategic decision-making, including mapping product roadmaps, complying with raft of regulations, ensuring the business securely embraces digital transformation while assuring the board, clients, and investors that cyber capabilities are fit for purpose. Here to talk more about their roles is Mr. Tom Brett. He is the training lead at BSI Cybersecurity. Mr. Tom Brett has been involved in all aspects of IT and cybersecurity. He has been involved in consultancy, training, and even speaking internationally at conferences on all aspects of security and helping businesses and corporates together with the public and government sector organizations to build their capabilities and mitigate risk. So let us welcome Mr. Tom Brett. He's going to take the session titled Your First 100 Days as CISO, or Crash Boom Bang, How Your CISO Will Not Be Enough to Tackle Your Next Crisis, which I have to point out is hilariously named. Mr. Brett, please join us for your 60-minute session, 5 to 10 minutes of which we request you to keep for question and answers. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I think it's evening time in Bangladesh. If you would just let me know that you can see my screen there with the BSI and EC Council logo, and then I can proceed.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Excellent. Thank you very much, guys. So thank you for the opportunity of being able to present this evening. What I'm actually going to speak about is really starting off, what is a CISO? Not going into too much detail with regards to the actual role itself. But looking at it as a job, the person, and what the requirements are with regards to, I suppose, obtaining that first role, maybe as a CISO, down into planning. So let's say we take on the particular position in an organization. What should we do, I suppose at the start, down into being able to make a name for yourself, to be able to get buy-in from the relevant stakeholders. What's the general process you want to go through within the first 100 days, and maybe what not to do. And hopefully that then will give us some areas of concern, maybe open up some questions that I can actually have a look at the end of the day, or the end of the session. So the CISO role itself. From the CSO online, they actually say that the Chief Information Security Officer is the executive responsible for an organization's information and data security. And it's an interesting area, it's an interesting role, it's an interesting position, which has massively changed over the last decade, or potentially two, if we look at organizations that may have been very mature. Depending on where you're operating, depending on the geolocations that the organization works, and potentially industries, there may be a requirement for the organization to have a CISO. But in a lot of cases, it's a role that can be sort of split between many different areas, or between many different other roles. To the same degree, the CISO role can report into many different people. I've worked with organizations where a CISO would report into a chief security officer, would report into regulatory requirements or regulatory teams, maybe someone like a CRO, chief. We have other areas where you would be working with governance, and in other cases where you'd be reporting directly into maybe the board or the CEO. So a CISO, an unusual role where it's still a developing area of the business, and based on the, I would say, the geographic location and the industry, it would lead to different reporting lines. One of the aspects here that's mentioned from CSO is that, with the role, with the industry, definitely being an expanding role, and also a role that's potentially titled differently. They refer to the chief security officer as potentially a role. I would generally say that the chief security officer is more of a larger remit, dealing generally with the physical security, more commonly maybe the CIO as a reporting line in a lot of cases. So I suppose when you look at the bureaucracy, especially the different roles that you're reporting into from those reporting lines, and potentially I'm going to say certain conflicts of interest. So for example, if we look at the reporting line of a CISO reporting into a CIO, that chief information officer is someone who has to enable the business, bring on technologies. And if you're reporting into that person, in certain cases, it can cause some distortion. Most of the time, if you have the right person, well, it will work. But if you don't have the right person, you can have problems. So I've added probably one of my more important traits at the bottom of this list. This list is developed by EC Council, and they say, what are the 5 most important traits of a CISO? They say technical knowledge and experience. Most definitely is definitely a requirement. Do you need to be a person that can wire patch panels and set up firewalls? Not necessarily, but definitely being aware of the technology, their placement, so that you're a stakeholder in the sort of networking area. That would be important. Communication and diplomatic skills. Yes, there is, a massively important area when we look at those reporting lines, to be able to communicate the needs of the business. And as I mentioned here in the session, it's not in a technical manner. So a potential problem a lot of CISOs face, especially new aspiring CISOs, is that they're coming maybe from a technical background and they try and create business cases that are too technical. We need to step back and start looking at it from a business perspective and be diplomatic. I suppose know when to fight what battles, being able to get people on board. Strong leadership skills, most definitely, like any other C-level position, and the ability to understand the business and the alignment. I would always say anytime I'm delivering or working from consultancy to delivering training and workshops, that if you don't align the security program to the business, it will actually not work. People will avoid it. People will go and do everything they can to avoid you. So we need to look at the organization and we need to enable the organization to prosper, but in a more secure manner. Obviously, 5th aspect here is dedicated to self-development and security training. I would say self-development, the awareness and understanding of technology and the changing landscape. So if we look at the last 3, 5, 10 years, and we have a look at the different technologies that have been used more and more and more, if we start looking at different industries, we hear of Industry 4.0, the rise in more and more and more operational technology and the management of it. If we're working into that industry, well, we very much need to be aware of it. To the same degree, regulations, laws, acts, these literally will change based on the geolocations that the organization is working. So if you're working from Bangladesh, you're working in an organization that has American bases, that is working in Europe, you'll be working with several different requirements with regards to regulation. The last one, it's out of the points because it's one from me, the fact of being humble and aware of your strengths and weaknesses, to me, is probably the most important trait of a CISO, so that you yourself are aware of your weaknesses and where you need to tap into other people, other services. They may be consultancy services, they may be other experts within the organization, so that again, you can actually onboard that knowledge or somebody else that has that. Experience and qualifications. I have this slide up just mainly because I'm often asked, how long do we need to be working in information security before we can put ourselves forward for this kind of role? I would generally look at 7 to 10 years from a range of topics. Some of the areas, security and operations management, IAM, identity and access management, the aspect of being able to look at budgeting, resource management, there's one of the important aspects where time can definitely be more helpful. So you can start looking at, okay, how long rollouts take, what's the actual cost? And when we think about the likes of budgeting and resourcing, being able to get those resources. So the ability of being able to make a business case, rightly worded, to be able to tap into the relevant people. So just as a general aspect, any of you that are aspiring for this role, a major, I suppose, step that you should be taking is to plan for it. So start looking at, okay, what am I working with now? What are the weaknesses that I myself have, and how am I going to tap into it? For that purpose, EC Council have developed their CISO program. I would deliver this and a wide range of other programs. And I actually particularly like the CISO because it particularly goes into, for domain 5, the strategic planning, the financial management, and all of the other aspects accordingly, contracts and due diligence with third parties, and so on and so forth. Whereas domain 1 is very important when we look at the likes of why we need information security, why we need a security program, governance, that aspect, what are the regulations, the laws, the acts. So the over-ending question is, can I do it, or can we do it? And as Bob the Builder would say, yes, we can. Once we line up the relevant aspects, we gear ourselves up with the knowledge and the experience, well, then we can drive for that position. So we look at the role. Here's a role that I actually came across this morning while preparing the last minute changes for this, which was to do with an organization looking for a CISO. And you can see that the actual remuneration on this role is pretty attractive. At the end of the day, we often refer to the fact that they're actually looking for a unicorn. In a lot of cases, they're looking for people, personas that may not exist. Or you may be thinking, well, actually, I can do it, but how do I make sure I get the role, and from that role that I can actually make a name for myself? So a few slides here with the aspect: you've applied for a role, you've taken, or you've got offered the role and you've taken it. First thought, you're thrilled. You're jumping around with joy. You're thinking about all the benefits. You start thinking about it more and more and more, and you start saying, do I really have what it takes? How is the organization? What is the posture of the organization? What are its strengths? What are its weaknesses? Am I ever going to have enough time to perform it? So there's the aspect where we need to start thinking about, okay, how are we going to plan? If we don't perform our plan, and I'm not talking about an overall strategy for an information security governance program, but our own plan, what our steps are going to be, you will easily become overwhelmed. I've had many a conversation when I would deal with CISOs, and they would say to me, Tom, I've gone into this organization. There has not been a security function previously. There are no policies, or very few policies. The posture of the organization is just, it's not secure. Where do I start? And I often say, well, go back to the beginning. Start looking at, the highest risks, what we need to do, and start looking at start looking at forming that strategy where you're looking at some of your low-hanging fruit based on risk, and you're also looking at your overall strategy. You're going to plan what you're going to do based on your time resources. A sort of a simple gesture I often say is, think about one policy 1 week. You maybe say to yourself, but Tom, I won't even get a policy wrote this week. Well, then maybe it's one policy every 2 weeks. Maybe you've got less fires to fight. Well, then it could be one policy a day. So again, start planning. And if you don't plan, you will become overwhelmed, you will burn out, and you will end up leaving the organization, or maybe worse. So the honeymoon period is probably, one of the most important times of your employment, because it's this point when you're coming in, You're trying to make a name for yourself, as I say at the start here, to establish credibility. Why? Because that credibility will actually mean that the organization and the other peers, the other, if I can say, adults in the organization will trust you. They will realize you're a good steward. You can control and manage resources accordingly. So then they're then more likely to sign off on relevant business cases because you've actually been able to show you can perform the role. So the first 100 days, several months, very important. It will go fast. So again, as I've already mentioned, prioritized or prioritization. Here's a slide I often refer to. It's, you know, a slide I often throw up when I'm working with CISOs as a workshop and say, okay, what do we have? What are we missing? And I could very easily probably rearrange this into different orders, you know, as I often say, something that I might have as governance, you might put it somewhere else and whatever. But this is sort of a nice encapsulation of what a security portfolio of products should entail. Everything from overall governance down into your security operations, your network and your general security architecture, your IAM, your identity and access management stuff. So again, are we working with cloud? Are we using single sign-on or not? Multi-factor, are we using a federated identity? Overall risk management, what are the risks to the organization? Are we aware of them? Who do we have to report? Do we have a register? What about treatment? Legal and HR. So everything down to your, you know, data discovery requirements. Is that okay? So if legal come in and they say, well, we have an actual legal case, we need to identify what data you have. We could be talking about privacy regulations, all, as we can probably see, privacy, a massive area worldwide at the present time. Statutory requirements. If you have an ability to operate license, what do you need? So think about the likes of your SLAs, business continuity, and there that leads into business enablement. So the end of the aspect of this is that your portfolio can be overwhelming when you start looking at it as what do you need to achieve at the start. So we need, again, as I mentioned, to step back and start thinking about how do I prioritize? So I would always say the very first step is to understand and investigate the organization. Start thinking about, okay, who is the organization? What is the actual industry we're working in? What are the geographic locations? And then from that, what are the laws, regulations, acts, and culture of the people and the organization? What does it currently have within its arsenal of tools? What, you know, security program, what policies, what procedures, what tools we have, technology. What incidents have previously happened? Have we had any audits? What are the reports? What are those findings? You know, and again, what metrics do we have to be able to identify that it's working or not? People sometimes say to me, Tom, we don't have, you know, this, that, or the other. Well, then I would often say to understand the posture of the organization, pick a particular area and then dissect that to understand it. It could be the fact that you're coming in as a CISO and somebody else has left the organization. So on first look, all of these policies, procedures, technologies are there. And you're saying, okay, we're taking it from, you know, an area that we're already dealing with solid foundations. Don't assume. We need to assess it. So again, pick an area, dissect that area, and identify, is it in a secure posture? Is it secure? And then use that as an overall analysis to form your opinion of the greater size of the organization. Set up your relationships. You know, so again, when we come into an organization, we need to identify, obviously, who you're reporting into and who's reporting to you. So again, if you're working as a geographically dispersed organization, you're going to have regional security teams reporting into you. I often say to people, we need to form the relationships. Don't work in a siloed aspect. You know, I've worked in military environments where one person would shout at another person and expect it to be done. That doesn't work too well in private organizations. I would even argue it doesn't work very well in military situations. We need to have respect. We need to form these relationships. I need to be able to ring IT and say, hi guys, we have an issue. I need a patch rolled out. This patch needs to be rolled out within the next X amount of hours. In another situation, we may have something which is got a greater level of priority. So again, I can make that phone call. You know, there's an email going out to you, Sean or Susan. I need you to get this done, but I need it done ASAP. Form those relationships, but as well, listen. So it's grand when you're working with the direct reports to and from you, but we also need to look and work with all of the other business areas, as well as external stakeholders. So another business area, what is its requirements? What does it need to do? How are we going to enable that to operate in a more secure manner? Here we are in the crust of this global pandemic. Organizations have shifted their technology focus massively. I often refer to the aspect of shadow IT. Shadow IT, we generally refer to it as, you know, devices and technologies that maybe within our organization, I'm going to say unassessed. There's a lot of organizations out there now where departments within it have actually shifted to the cloud. And we've sort of thrown a blind eye to it momentarily to enable the business. But now I would say we're at business as usual. We should have assessed all of these. So start thinking about your different relationships, those different business units, making sure that we are aware of the technology stack that they're using and that they're aware that if they are incorporating, bringing in new technology, of the importance of us being aware to be able to risk assess it. Again, remember the aspect that the security program needs to be in alignment with the business. Our role is not to veto, to say no. More importantly, it's to enable it, to say, well, let's do it this way. And that will allow you to get, you know, the right way, the right posture across to enable the business. So again, external stakeholders, as I've said, external stakeholders could be anything from government bodies, regulatory bodies. It could be key suppliers, key customers. And again, this could all be down to the likes of SLAs, business continuity requirements, all of these kind of stuff. And a major thing that people often forget about, remember your champions. What is a champion? Who is a champion? Someone that's actually going to believe in the product or service that you're actually delivering and who can actually sell it on behalf of you. So I would always say, keep your stakeholders and your champions engaged. Even better if your stakeholders can become champions. But if you have a champion and you don't engage them, you don't keep them informed, you will lose them. And with that loss, you will lose your credibility and all of the other aspects that you need in order to perform the role. After listening to the different business units, the different stakeholders, that will allow you to identify the posture, identify the regulatory requirements, the geographical areas, all of that kind of stuff. Understand the business. As well as understanding the business, we then also need to understand our risk. And if we think about it, you may say, well, Tom, what is a risk? And I can very simply say, well, risk is equal to the probability multiplied by the impact. But when we really look at that probability multiplied by the impact, we need to know what are threats, what are crown jewels that our threat actors are actually going to chase, how motivated they are. Again, that would be linked to those crown jewels. What are vulnerabilities, our weaknesses? And from all of that, that will allow us to identify our posture, what controls we need. So again, we need to understand the business, where it's working, what do we do? So assess the risk, measure the current capabilities, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what's the maturity level of the organization. So whether you're using your capability maturity model integration, CMMI by Carnegie Mellon, whether you're working with the likes of the US and you have to work with CMMC based on NIST and that. It's a matter of understanding the maturity of the portfolio as a whole. I'm not sure if any of you here have actually worked with the likes of maturity models, but you often find that the organization is very mature up here in a particular area, and in another area, it's non-existent or very weak. We want to get our organization with a high level of maturity across the board. If we look at the CMMI from Carnegie Mellon as an example, I suppose we might aspire to get across the board to a level of maybe, hopefully 4, but definitely 3. So identify what we have and what we're lacking, and then bring the lacking areas up into an area that is defined. You may say, well, what are these CMMI, Tom? Well, think about the aspect that if we've not got something prepared, we don't have processes, when something happens, we're in a reactive mode. We're fighting fires. To get ourselves up into that capability level, we need to start thinking about what if and what do we do? So start thinking about defining the processes. Start thinking about being able to identify has something happened. And these are all those core areas. So what are the risks that will have the most highest negative impacts? And obviously enough that are likely. We don't want to concentrate on the areas that are never potentially going to happen, although, as we often say, something that's never going to happen is considered it until it happens. But if we keep an eye on our industry, keep an eye on the changes, it will allow us to predict other negative effects as they start, to grow. Again, how can effectiveness of investment be measured? So again, when we start looking at it from the business, we start looking at our capabilities, we can start looking at, okay, how will this change affect the business? And this becomes very important when we start looking at business cases. I suppose the security program needs to reduce risk, reduce cost or increase profit. And at the end of the day, that's what the business leaders want. It's all to do with monetary value. And there we are. Last point there, incidents. We can talk about incident response, incident management, but I would even actually go as far as saying, can we even identify incidents? Have we even identified different types of incidents? When we refer to incidents, we often refer to the aspect of, it's a data breach. Someone has been able to capture and process or extract, exfiltrate data, which could be intellectual property. It could be customer data, financial money, stock, whatever it is, But an incident can be a loss of continuity. So sometimes think back at our standard, what is security, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Only yesterday was I working with an organization that was predominantly involved in availability. They have major incident response teams purely down to SLA's loss of availability. So again, start thinking about what your incidents are, what those classifications are. Do we have that facility to detect them as well as respond? So your next step, you now understand the organization, you understand your stakeholders, your internal, your external, what you need to do, you understand that posture itself. Start forming your strategy. Anyone that knows me and has worked with me, I often do this in a very comical sort of manner where I turn around and think and say, this is you now. You're sad. You're sad because you actually realize what you don't have. Then start thinking about what will make you happy. As we all know, we're human. When we get to that point, we'll probably realize we're still unhappy because we'll have other wants and needs. But at the end of the day, in your position, look at the difference between you being sad and happy, and that's your gap analysis. From that, look at your resources, how much money you have, you know, how much people you have, the skill set you have, and then start planning that with regards to, you know, your current, your future, your 5, 3, 10-year plan, etc. So again, prioritize it. A major part of this strategy is going to be identifying your funding. How are you funded? Are you funded based on a percentage of the overall budget? Or is it something that you have to look at business cases? When we start looking at maybe a percentage, you'll set by a particular percentage of that overall amount with regards to your strategic planning. When we start looking at the likes of funding and resourcing, we can start looking at a top-down approach or a bottom-up. When we look at those different approaches, a top-down, and start to think, okay, what do we need? How much of that, or how much is it going to cost to achieve that? And then we start working out how much we need and what we can achieve. Bottom-up, start looking at what are the individual components, and then how is that going to equate to finance? I often look at the best as being a combination of top down and bottom up. Like anything, we often refer to the low hanging fruit, that quick win. Extremely important with regards to a new position as a CISO. Why? Because we want to be able to show our credibility. Yes, it's great to turn around and look and hopefully achieve a better, more secure posture, but that may not happen in the first several months. I would be very surprised if it will. Could take several years, but you want to be able to gain that credibility so that you can get more and more and more, let's say, acceptance agreements with regards to your plans, your business cases. For that, it's good to be able to demonstrate. So I would say within the first short period, let's say your 100 days of your honeymoon period, definitely try and look at a couple of programs that you can have implemented, hopefully within that time, but if not within it, definitely started prior to it. People often refer to maybe 5 or 6 programs in full to have instantiated to make long-term change, but definitely, you know, try and aim for 1 or 2, if possible, to be completed. If not completed, definitely well underway and being able to demonstrate metrics, because that will give you more buy-in. So we've already mentioned, get your strategic plans in alignment with the business. Remember, you're an enabler. Don't do something, don't refuse. Be able to define, do it this way. Get buy-in, plan, and again, remember, it's the business benefits. You know, I'm sure all of you, a lot of you here have seen more junior members. Definitely look at it from a technical perspective where the business leaders are not going to understand it. They're not going to be brought on board. So make sure you bring it in on a business term. And there we are, credibility. Be able to demonstrate you're a good steward. That good steward, someone that can manage and control and is responsible for the resources. And again, those resources, everything down to staff, money, time. That you're competent. Did you have the skills and expertise in order to do the job? And again, remember, you can be extremely skilled, extremely knowledgeable, best person for the job. But if you're quiet, in a corner, talk to nobody, report to nobody, no one is going to know it. So again, when you're looking at that initial stages, that honeymoon period, those 100 days, the bang bust, we need to be able to demonstrate. So again, report, metrics, identify what you're doing. Have sound judgment. Again, when something happens, you're able to prioritize. And again, think about the organization. If in the event that the organization has an incident, how is that incident prioritized? It's often that misconception, and I've actually mentioned an incident a moment ago. What is an incident? And if I was to ask people here, I won't ask because it may get loads inundated with responses, or maybe I'll have very few. I'm not sure if you can respond. But if I was to ask you personally, what is an incident? 99% of people will say, it's a loss of data, as I've already mentioned. We'll potentially turn around and get the, more experienced people turn around and say, well, Tom, it's a CIA or whatever. I would go as far as saying an incident is any policy non-compliance. So an incident is not always the exfiltration of data. Yes, it is, but a policy non-compliance. And that shows you the importance of being able to prioritize. So focus on the actual plan. Focus on what you're going to strategize, what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and to what degree. So now we have our plan. We need to communicate it, and take this communication of your plan as being also to sell your business case. So articulate and communicate what you want to achieve, where you wish to take the program. If we're looking at a CISO, a famous quote I often refer to is Ronald Reagan. I don't know if you are big fans of Ronald Reagan, but one of his quotes that was very famous was, "Wake me up if you need me, even if I'm in the middle of a cabinet meeting." So if we turn around and we look at it, for me, that basically states that if I'm in a meeting, which is a board meeting, I'm probably asleep because a lot of it I don't want to hear, or it's beyond my capabilities or comprehension. But I want to have my 5 to 10 minutes of fame. I want to be able to say, here we are. Here's a potential risk posture, and here's what we need to do. So again, in order to invoke change within an organization, we have to be able to articulate the problems and the requirements in order to change our posture. So from that, think about developing, communicating the plan, gaining buy-in from management and stakeholders. As we've already mentioned, avoid the tech language and present it in a business language in terms of that ROI, return on investment, the efficiency. I often use the balanced scorecard approach sometimes. So whatever way it is you're going to use, but be able to sell it in a business-oriented manner. There's our low-hanging fruit. I've mentioned it. Look at your big wins, but also look at your quick wins. The big win that may take 2 years to implement is not going to get you credibility within the first 100 days. It's not going to get you beyond your honeymoon period. You could be quietly, gently tipping away at the back, making the organization more secure than it will ever potentially hope to be. But if no one knows it, you're actually being looked at as someone that's not achieving anything. So get those small projects, cheap, quick wins across the line as well. And again, we can then grow from it. I suppose the other aspect can also be, if we think about the likes of risk, we often look at our risk matrix with regards to the probability and the impact. We'll put it up that way for the sake of the manner of the conversation. And we'll do it 3 by 3. Instead of looking at the high risk, high probable situation here, it actually might be beneficial to reduce these 2 or 3, and again, they're quicker, each of them are easier, but actually when you combine them, they actually have a similar risk to the more greater, longer, more problematic solutions. Things to avoid. I could probably speak for an hour, for 2 hours, for a day on this first point. And I'm trying to cram in as much as I can into this session for you. So hopefully I'm not speaking too fast. But don't focus on the technical. As a CISO, especially someone that has come up through the ranks, that has been a practitioner, we tend to always go for the technology. For me, no. I have a mantra I often use. And again, in the world of security, it's great. As I say, We've only got two shapes we need to remember. One is a triangle and the other is a circle. The circle, because everything re-involves, we need to reassess it. And the triangle, well, we've everything from our CIA, as I've mentioned already, but now I'm going to say people, processes, and technology. So I'm going to say first step, define your policies, your processes, all of that kind of stuff. So we're here with our managerial security controls, that kind of stuff. Then after that, train and educate your people. There's so many organizations that have policies, but the actual staff don't know what they are. So many organizations that have procedures that staff don't know what they are. We actually take a person in, we employ them, we throw them through an induction program, and we expect them to understand and be familiar with that a year later. Doesn't happen. So we need to have ongoing training, whatever form it is within the organization, to continually inform people. But to the same degree, we don't want to we don't want to throw loads and too much information that's not relevant. So we need to pick and choose what we educate them with, what we make them aware of. So all of the processes, the procedures, the policies that are to do with their job function, make them aware of it and assess them. Do they understand it? After we have actually trained and educated our people, then we jump into our third part, which is technology. I'm just thinking I'm writing with a red pen. I'm hoping that's not offending anyone. I should be looking at culture here. But if it is, take it that I'm using a different color. So after we've implemented our policies and procedures, we've trained our people. Now we use technology. That technology is used as a catch-all. And what I mean by that, where the other aspects have failed. So our policy is there, but it's not followed. People have not done the process. Now we have our data loss prevention, which flags us when someone has attached a document to an email being sent outside the organization where it shouldn't, whatever. And if we look at the overall aspect of security, well, we'll throw a circle around it again. And that is our physical security. And this is where we get our defense in depth. So we're not looking at just a single, control. We're looking at multiple controls. And I can hear you say, yeah, Tom, but we're remotely working or we've moved to the cloud. We don't have physical security anymore. Well, in our security program, that's where we start looking at risk again, and we start assessing it, and we start looking at our relevant type of treatment, whatever it may be. And we'd actually say, well, okay, let's look at a compensating control. And that compensating control might be multi-factor authentication. So again, start thinking about it. Don't focus on the technical. Look for the easier solution, bake it in. So that's the term we often use. Bake in security. Do it this way, it will be more secure. Other aspects, don't blame previous people. You may have an issue that's there, but don't keep on saying, oh, that's because of John Paul who was there before me, or it's a legacy problem. We need to provide the solutions, the fixes. So again, don't be negative, but don't blame people. Just be the solution person. Last but not least, don't try too much. Don't try to do too much. I've seen a lot of people who are a CISO who've taken on a role and actually were overwhelmed because they tried to achieve too much in a short period of time and ran out of steam, just couldn't achieve it. So we need to be able to look at what's achievable in that short period of time. Communication, stakeholder engagement, how do we achieve it? Measure and report. Everything, metrics, KPIs, key performance indicators, KRIs, key risk indicators, KCIs, key control indicators. People often say to me, key control indicator. Well, if we don't have an indicator that allows us to identify that a control is working or not, what's the point of the control? You know, do we know if it's working? You know, so if you have an antivirus solution, anti-malware solution, have you tested it? Does it work? You know, to the same degree, what about your policies? Are they actually being applied, followed? You know, leading and lagging indicators. If we start thinking about these, our key risk indicator, is there an indicator that we can identify that is actually going to allow us to identify that we're actually getting a higher, that we're becoming under higher risk or lower? And is that leading or lagging? So a leading indicator is something that's actually going to allow us to predict a change that will have a negative effect. A lagging, it has already happened. So maybe think about a lagging indicator as an alert generated for a SIM. It has already happened. You know, a leading could be the aspect that you've actually been probed on your firewall from an APT, an IP address that's identified from an APT group. And that will allow you to say, well, actually, we're being probed. Now, this may have other precursors which may happen. From our reports, use this to maintain your engagement. Again, think about your board meeting. You know, here's our actual posture. You know, here's what it means. Here's what our plan is. And here's the aspect that we are achieving it. And remember the project management mantra. Projects fail them often, but early. If we actually, you know, push a project forever, it's my project, this is going to happen and work if it kills me. It means you're going to have resources assigned to projects which probably should have been pulled and projects closed down earlier to release those resources for a better project. So you're better off looking at the actual project and say, well, actually, this is not going to achieve its desired results, its objectives. So I'm going to kill the project. I'm going to release those resources, and I'm then going to reconsume those resources into another project that's more fit for purpose. To the same degree, we've mentioned that credibility, that management of resources, the reassignment of the resources, the ability of being able to stand up and say, I made a mistake, or the actual landscape has changed. What we're doing, how we're doing business, a new regulatory requirement has come in. So our old methodology, what we were planning, is no longer fit for purpose. It needs to be changed, needs to be modified. This will allow you to maintain or again gain that credibility in the role. So conclusion, and I think I'm 4 minutes early for my my question and answers, which is not doing too bad. The start of the role can make or break you. So yes, come in energetic, but look at the planning. Look at what you're going to achieve within your first couple of weeks, first couple of months, and start thinking about, okay, maybe the first 3 weeks should purely be there into understanding the organization. Then from that, we start looking at our likes of our quick wins and so on. Make sure you align your security strategy with the business strategic views and strategic direction. Remember, you're an enabler. Oh, my mouse has changed over. Let me get back into a pointer. You're an enabler. If you're not an enabler, you're seen as that disabler. People will avoid you. You know, people will try and get around you. We want to be able to be that person that is approachable, where a business owner can come to you and say, Tom, what do you think of? How am I going to implement? I need to move a service to the cloud. You know, what do I need? So we start looking at everything down to our classifications, our requirements, and we become an enabler. But again, look for those quick wins. Don't underestimate the value of that quick win. Yes, we want to have a strategic view. Yes, we want to be in that aspect of getting into a more secure manner. And, that's a very important thing. As I often say, there's no such thing as secure. It does not exist. It's more secure and less secure. So we want to be on the path to security, but look for those quick wins. Meaningful change may require time. And last but not least, plan, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. And I think that finishes off my session. I have 2 minutes to go. That will line us up to questions. I have a question coming up in the chat window a bit, I think. Can we get this document? I'm quite happy for this document to be shared. If it's not shared directly from EC Council, you can contact me. I have my details there. So yes, I'm happy for the document to be shared out if it's valuable to you. Questions? Any questions, guys? Thank you, Abdul. I think I'm waiting for someone to come back in. I see a hand up. Imam, I think. Excellent. Okay, so what is the main goal if we think about incident response? Excellent question, Abid. I would generally say, obviously, your main goal is to limit the actual negative impact to the organization. So if we start looking at incident response and we start looking at it from, I suppose, a security function, we have to start thinking about, okay, prepare for incidents. So everything down to what are processes and procedures we need to do, what are types of incidents. So again, we can categorize. Is that okay? So if we start looking at being able to categorize incidents, we can then look at what is the core response. Think about a category based on, is it a loss of continuity? Is it a loss of data? And then we can classify the type of data and so on and so forth. This is paramount to the actual response procedure because we need to triage to then allow us to identify what to do accordingly. So again, main goal of incident response to minimize the negative effect to the business. Is that okay? And again, from that then it will be very relevant based on the type of incident. Giovanni, I think, what about, just spare me 1 second, I have other questions. What about to start the career when no more young? As we get old, I think your meaning there. I'm not a spring chicken. I'm not young myself. I don't think there's an age limit to coming into a CISO role. Obviously, for this, I would need to turn around and look at, each individual person with regards to what their traits are, what it's the industry that they've come from, and so on and so forth. For me, I didn't move into a CISO role. I actually didn't even plan my role. I left school, I joined the army. I left the army after 12 years, started working as in software development within the army in different areas, and I sort of moved around. I would often say, look at yourself, look at your past experience, and identify your traits. Obviously, the biggest problem with getting into a role of a CISO is you're actually moving into a position which has a high risk for an organization. So very much getting the experience is probably the most important aspect. To get that experience, maybe look at everything for voluntary or voluntary groups, voluntary positions, where you could be working with a charity or something to start tipping in, getting yourself aware with an organization that doesn't have the financial capability. Excellent. So you have experience. So again, Unfortunately, certification is going to be a major aspect as well. Is that okay? Where people look at, okay, what is the background? What's the skills? Stuff like that. So maybe something that we can actually look at later on for you. Is that okay? Let's see. Email address. You can get me. I'll put my email address up there at tom.brett@bsigroup.com. Best way to get me is via LinkedIn, guys. Is that fair enough? That's probably your best way. And I will actually share with you my LinkedIn address, and please do connect with me. Just to check for other questions. If we go for certification, from which can we choose? Excellent question. So I have wrote an article, and actually I have it listed on this slide. And the article potentially is looking at what is the role of a CISO and what are the relevant different traits that are required. So there's many paths. Definitely, I would often say that the more knowledge of technology and security processes is great. So you could look at something like a CISSP as a course, or even if you don't do the course or the exam, start looking at the content in it. Look at something like a CISM, a CISM from ISACA with regards to it. Look at the CISO from EC Council. It's not necessarily going to show you the starting points. That would be one of the later ones. But I would definitely say something like CISSP. As a trait for a CISO, obviously networking is, probably one of the most important knowledgeable areas for anyone involved in security, in cybersecurity, based on the aspect that we are so reliant on networking and networking technologies, and so many of our risks come across from that vector. So I would definitely say the likes of networking. That could be, I'm not quite sure of in Bangladesh what are the greater certifications. It could be a CompTIA Network Plus, a Cisco CCNA. I would definitely advocate the likes of networking to some degree. Do you need to be an expert? No, but a good solid knowledge of networking, I definitely think is important. Other areas, CISA listed there, brilliant. I would say a good aspect of a CISA is that it gives you that, auditing experience. So you're actually aware of being able to analyze and assess organizations, which will help us for thinking beyond the boundary. I think the aspect there, Abid, most importantly, is to be aware of the technology, the stack, the industry, the landscape. For me, reading reports, I would assign several hours a week for just reading reports. October is the month I probably will say I love and also hate. Why? Because it's the reporting month. If you have a look, you'll see the IBM Ponemon report. We have Microsoft reports after being released the last 2 weeks with regards to different threats. So again, with regards to looking beyond the boundary, I think being aware of the posture, being aware of the security landscape is paramount. So to be aware of what the different trends are and how they may affect your organization, and again, that's going to be very relevant based on the region. So within your region, start thinking about any new regulations that may be coming on board, start looking at the organization and the geographical areas. And again, that may link you into advanced threats, advanced persistent threats, particular types of threat actors that actually you may face as an organization. So Abid, hopefully that helps you out with that question. Guys, I'm after posting my LinkedIn profile. It's probably the easiest way to connect with me and to contact me. And if anyone has not received or does not receive a copy of the presentation, please just connect with me. I will potentially ask you to connect with the seminar first to get a copy of it. And if you don't get it from there, then come to me. Any other questions, guys? I will say thank you very much for your time. I think it's evening time over there, so I will say keep yourself safe and well, and it's great to meet you and to get the opportunity to speak. Oh, if we think outside of Bangladesh a bit, I think a major aspect worldwide, globally, is obviously looking at privacy. It's an area actually I went to have a quick look at, but I got caught up in another project. But what the state of privacy and privacy regulations are, but it's in a flux if we look at it globally. I work a lot with the US, and until they come across a federated law, it's something that's changing. So definitely the likes of privacy, and it's definitely an area that is very important for us to be in and aware of. So I'd say that would definitely be an area with regards to globally. I will just hang on here while we wait for one of the panelists. You're very welcome, Abid. I'm just responding to a message here. I just see actually another question here from on a different. I will accept Abid. Just give me 2 minutes. I'm just not on at the moment. What role a CISO can make logical changes to the corporate culture? Probably one of the more difficult questions to answer. Not even a question to answer, but the most difficult change to invoke. If I was looking at change in corporate culture, the first thing we need to look at is what is the structure of the organization? What is the type of organization? If we're working for an organization which has a single person that owns it, very hard to change. If we're looking at an organization which has shareholders or board of directors, potentially at least we can work with many people, and the risk appetite is going to be split. The corporate culture, very much you need to get buy-in from the board, buy-in from senior management. So therefore, to be able to get that, sometimes a CISO fixates on risk with regards to this is the potential problem, this is what's going to happen. Sometimes I often find that if you can't get your projects accepted, sold, turn the way in which you sell them. Start thinking about guarantees. So what I would often say is, if I can't get you to believe in my project as I'm selling it based on the negative aspects, what's the potential repercussions? I'm going to start selling you guarantees. So what is it that you need in order to turn around and, I suppose, achieve your long-term sustenance in the organization? And then how can my project enable that? So again, it could be, I don't know, to be able to facilitate continuity of service and use that as the sale. So I haven't got a name on the actual question of that one, but that's what I would potentially say in that case. Start getting the buy-in, start looking at the actual senior management and the board of directors, start looking at how am I going to get my actual business cases believed in. The other aspect is when you start looking at culture, we need to make sure that that shifts all the way down. So again, if we're looking at even down to a program, making sure that the actual CEO is seen to be there, standing behind the program, so that we have their clout, their backing. And that's a major aspect to get the corporate culture to shift. Mohammed, I'll do that, yes. Syed, do my master's program in cybersecurity, University of Colombo. Heard detail about CISO certification from one of my university teachers, but after the lecture, it's more clear, and I am really wish to start working to get CISO certification. Thank you very much, and I hope you appreciate. I hope it's beneficial to you. no problem connecting with me. Abid, people, process, technology. If we think about security perspective, which one can I choose for believing in? Interesting. People, I would say first and foremost. Technology is the area that most people in security cling to, jump into initially, but I would definitely say we need to go back into the people process. People will generally do the right thing if they understand what that right thing is and why. So one of the problems we often find is people don't do it because they don't fully understand why. So again, bring them along on your journey. It's something that I've seen from my past in the military, where you were told what to do and potentially not informed. But if you generally inform people, they will generally do the right thing when they understand why. Is that okay? In order to get the people to do the right thing, that's when we look at our processes. So again, start thinking about our processes, start thinking about baking security in. If you create a process that does it this way, by doing it that way, it will mean that it will be in that more secure manner. I often say, think about a new project. For any new project, we need to go through a process. That process is going to have a checklist based on maybe the classification of data or the classification of the asset. That's going to require certain things to be done. And this is how we actually define the processes. And again, technology as the last area. For cybersecurity, is it necessary to be from a CSE background? Which skills should be focused on the sector? I think it's probably, Omar, very much based on what sector you're going into. I'm working a lot at the moment with the likes of ICS, SCADA, operational technology. And again, for people working in that to understand the actual equipment that's being there. Again, you could be working in maybe something like a bank, which I would definitely say to understand that regulatory requirements. Again, very much depending on the sector. Is that okay? And I would say as a CISO, someone from that level, you need to have that broad understanding of what the requirements are for the risk appetite of the organization, and also what the requirements are based on regulatory requirements from the regions, the geographical areas, the industries that you're focused on. So I would say the answer to that question, Omar, very much dependent on where and what the organization is. If you wish, you can send me maybe a question with a bit more detail on it, and I might be able to help you, maybe via LinkedIn or whatever. But definitely very much focused based on the organization, its sector, and its geographical regions. So hopefully that helps, Omar. If we calculate the risk factor, which should be our first priority? A bit. And I think I'll take this as maybe the last question. I think someone was coming in to relieve me there on the session. I'm quite happy to talk, but I know there's a time limit. I would say the risk is going to be a combination between, what the probability is and what the impact. And again, to look at that, we need to start thinking about the impact with regards to what is it? Is it going to be a loss of data, IP, whatever? What is the cost to that, to the organization? Is it going to be a loss of continuity? So very much bring it back to its monetary value. What's the monetary loss? If we look at risk, we can often define the risk appetite of the organization is the amount or level of risk an organization is willing to lose in pursuit of its day-to-day activities. So think about it. What is the actual, the dollar value? How much are we going to lose? And then run that based on your assessment. Is that okay, Abid? I think someone was coming in there. You're very welcome. Come on back in, and I'm quite happy to hand over. Basil.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but we are out of time. There is a time constraint on this program, and our next speaker is waiting in line.
Thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you so much, Mr. Brett, for such an interesting and educational session. Thank you again for taking the time from your busy schedule to participate in our humble event. So yes, I know. Thank you. And